When Walt Disney learned that Alfred Hitchcock wanted to film his next movie at Disneyland, he allegedly said, "In no circumstances would Hitchcock, maker of that disgusting movie Psycho, be allowed to shoot a foot of film in Disneyland." Disney wasn't the only one that was offended by Psycho, which might seem relatively tame 65 years later, but it pushed the bounds of what had been seen and depicted in film and is even considered the first slasher movie. But Psycho may have scared people in more ways than you realize. We're talking all about it this week in Kaden's Movie Club. Spoilers ahead, so if you haven't seen it, beat it. The most obvious fear in Psycho is the idea that you could come across a dangerously insane person at any moment. It's a terrifying thought, but there are a bunch of other fears that the movie exploits to keep our attention throughout the story. We start with Marion. She's our protagonist. She's having a romantic affair with Sam. And I should point out, it's not an affair because they're cheating on anybody, it's an affair because they're not married and it's 1960. Times have changed, but for the sake of the story, we need to understand that it's not considered proper. Marion would like to be in a respectable public relationship with Sam, but the problem is he's tied up in a lot of debt and doesn't feel he can provide for Marion. Again, it's 1960. But lo and behold, a possible solution presents itself when Marion is asked by her boss to deliver a large cash deposit to the bank.
I never carry more than I can afford to lose.
Tom, cash transaction of this size is most irregular.
But we don't see Marion at the bank. We see her in her room. Marion's doing a little embezzling. And this is the first fear that's presented, the fear of acting on our impulses, of having a lapse in judgment. And the movie makes it very obvious that this is an impulsive crime for Marion rather than something she's done many times because she's terrible at it. She waves at her boss as she drives out of town. Only realizing afterwards that she made a mistake. She doesn't have any sort of plan how far she can get or where she might stay and ends up sleeping in her car on the side of the road. And when a cop wakes her up, she acts as suspicious as he possibly could.
May I see your license?
Why?
And this continues on with Marion making mistake after mistake, but it's not played as a comedy of errors. The tension is slowly increasing. We get nervous every time it seems like Marion is going to get caught. But why do we feel that way? We know what she's doing is wrong. Why are we identifying with her? Because the movie has put us into her perspective and connected her actions with a fear we've all felt. What if an impulsive decision gets me into real trouble? Marion eventually finds herself in a rainstorm with the worst windshield wipers I've ever seen, forcing her to stop at the nearest motel. And here's where that primary fear comes in. We'd all like to hope that if we did end up in a sticky situation that forces us to cross paths with strangers, those strangers would be decent people. And that's probably going to be the case most of the time, but we all know that fear. What if they're not? Marion spends time with Norman Bates. He's awkward and lonely and does taxidermy as a hobby.
Well, it's more than a hobby.
But he's friendly enough. The real trouble is his overbearing mother. Norman explains that Mrs. Bates is ill, but not physically.
I don't hate her. I hate what she's become. I hate the illness.
The stress of losing a lover years ago caused her to snap, and she now takes it all out on Norman. And even though he resents her, he refuses to put his mother in a home, so now he's trapped, taking care of both his mother and this rundown motel, which is ironic because the motel and Mrs. Bates are both old, run down, and forgotten. After spending some time with Norman and seeing how life has trapped him in an unfortunate situation, Marion decides she's going to give up her life of crime and return the money first thing in the morning. Norman, on the other hand, might not be so innocent after all, which unfortunately causes someone else to become very upset. And this is how we get one of the most iconic sequences of all time. There's all the underlying fears of Marion's lapse in judgment, of encountering insane people by chance, and now there's an instant fear of vulnerability. You're rarely more exposed than you are in the shower, and the shot of a silhouette creeping up behind Marion just lets the audience sit with that fear for several long seconds. To this day, this scene is one of the best examples of editing. It feels like you're seeing explicit details here, but there's not a single shot of actual nudity or violence in any frame. The frenetic style of the editing implies everything you need to know, and your brain fills in the gaps. Also, fun fact, it was chocolate syrup that was filmed going down the drain because it showed up better in black and white than fake blood did. The concept of killing off your main character halfway through the movie was practically unheard of back in 1960. Audiences would not have expected that. Even today, it's a difficult story beat to pull off because you've invested all this time in a character and now the audience is left floating. They need to be able to grasp onto something to stay rooted in the story. The perspective has to switch. So we get this final shot of Marion pulling back from her lifeless stare to show we are leaving that perspective. So whose perspective do we now fall into? Norman's. Norman is horrified at what his mother has done, but he's a dutiful son. So we immediately go from Marion's death scene to watching him meticulously clean up all the evidence. It's not a montage either. We go through every step. He has to get a mop, clean the tub, he lays out the shower curtain, wraps up the body, he gets her suitcase and all of her things. But here's the interesting part. When he puts the car in the swamp to hide all the evidence, there's a moment when it stops sinking. And the question is, why did you feel nervous when the car stopped sinking? And why were you relieved when it finally sank into the mud? Our main character has just died and now we're identifying with the man covering it all up? Yeah, because the movie takes the time to put us in his perspective and connect it to a fear. How far would you go to help protect someone you love? But surely the main character isn't going to be a villain, is it? No, that's why we're introduced to Arbogast, the private investigator. He's got all the makings of a classic noir detective, but the movie uses all these well-known tropes to get at another fear. When Arbogast questions Norman, the detective is convinced something isn't right, and that he can get the truth if he talks to Norman's mother. He sneaks into the house, and the suspense comes from the dramatic irony. Arbogast thinks he's looking for a little old lady, but we know what Miss Bates is capable of. Arbogast has shown himself to be very capable. He's caught all of Norman's lies, he's discovered that Marion was here, but for all his expertise, there's just something he couldn't possibly know. The underlying fear is that no matter how capable or smart we think we are, there could always be something we don't know. And just like that, the movie has ripped away our second protagonist. So by the time we come to the perspective of Lila, Marion's sister, we have zero trust left in the storyteller. There's a very real fear that Lila and Sam could meet the same fate because we're just getting to know them in the third act of the movie. They're no more special than the last two protagonists, and look how it turned out for them. When Lila and Sam go to investigate the Bates Motel themselves, they're not totally clueless. They know something terrible has probably happened to Marion. They know it's probably dangerous to go to the motel, but they both agree they have to know what's going on. And again, we're given a fear to connect with. What if our desire to know the truth puts us in danger? Maybe there are some things we're better off not knowing, but as humans, we can't resist. We always want to know. At this point in the story, we saw Norman hide his mother in the cellar. So when Norman is searching the house for Lila and she notices the cellar door as a hiding place, the audience squirms. It's a classic don't go in there horror movie situation. And then the rug is pulled out from under the audience once again. We go from thinking we know what Lila will find in the cellar to the reveal that we had no idea. Norman's mother is a corpse. Norman then rushes in wearing her clothes and a wig, revealing that he's suffering from some kind of split personality where he is part Norman and part his mother. This is all explained for us by a psychiatrist at the police station.
Norman Bates no longer exists. He only half existed to begin with. And now, the other half has taken over.
Did he kill my sister?
Yes. And no.
And this presents a final fear. Could I ever be so attached to someone, so embedded in a relationship that they take over my identity?
I'm not even gonna swat that fly. I hope they are watching. They'll see. They'll see and they'll know. And they'll say, why, she wouldn't even harm a fly.
Psycho is one of the most famous movies of all time. It may not feel quite as scary as it did in 1960, but it holds up phenomenally well because it taps directly into a wide range of common fears people have. And it does this by constantly switching character perspectives to expose us to their fears. Some are really obvious, like being attacked in the shower or encountering a psychotic person, and some are more subtle, like the consequence of an impulsive decision. But next week, we're going to talk about more underlying fears when we watch a movie where the main threat might not be what you'd expect. The War of the Worlds, the 2005 one, depicts an alien invasion of Earth. It's loosely based on the novel by H.G. Wells written in the 1890s. But this movie is probably more inspired by a different adaptation of the book. In 1938, Orson Welles narrated an adaptation of the book for a radio show. The show started with a breaking news segment that was meant to occur within the story, but some people apparently believed was real and started to panic. There's lots of dispute about how many people actually believed there was an alien attack going on, but either way, it became a controversy. Lots of media outlets accused the radio show of being deceptive and reckless. Whether or not lots of people actually did panic, there was clearly a lot of concern about the idea of causing a panic, at what people will do when they're scared. So here's some questions to keep in mind while you watch. What do you think is the primary threat of the movie? What scene scared you the most, and what was the underlying fear? What do you think of the ending? What do you think it means for the rest of the story? So let me know what thoughts and observations you had about Psycho, and I'll see you back here next week to discuss War of the Worlds. And if you want to stay in the know about Movie Club, you know where to go.